Hola, bueno, muy buenas noches. Muchas gracias a todos por la extra paciencia en la presentación de hoy. Estamos muy contentos de iniciar hoy el segundo semestre de actividades públicas del CEAC, el Centro de Estudios de Arquitectura Contemporánea de esta universidad. En los ingresos al aula, en los dos laterales, están este calendario que ven en la pantalla, que también está en la web de la escuela. Este es el calendario de todas las actividades que vamos a estar llevando adelante hasta fin de año. Empezamos hoy, o en realidad terminamos hoy, el taller de invierno Buenos Aires Portrait, que fue realizado con todos los alumnos de la escuela de grado. El resultado de este trabajo colectivo de un retrato de Buenos Aires en fotografía, maqueta y planimetría está para visitar en el invernadero, en el patio sobre Sáenz Valiente. Hoy va a terminar esa exhibición, así que pueden pasar a verla una vez que termine la presentación de hoy de Christoph Gantenbein. Bueno, y después pueden, como siempre, ver un poco más de información en la página web de la escuela a medida que se vayan anunciando los eventos, pero en el mes de septiembre vamos a recibir al escritor argentino Martín Coan como parte del ciclo Miscelánea que tenemos aquí en el CEAC, donde todos los años invitamos a distintos artistas que tienen una práctica con alguna relación tangencial con el entorno construido a que nos comenten sobre su trabajo. Martín va a estar escribiendo sobre la percepción de la ciudad en sus libros. Después vamos a recibir también a Bernardo Rossello, arquitecto de la ciudad de Bahía Blanca, que se incorpora este año al equipo docente de la escuela. La presentación de Bernardo Rossello formará parte del ciclo El trabajo de los demás, donde profesores, directores, miembros de la escuela presentan su trabajo y lo presentan dentro de una constelación de afinidades intelectuales en las cuales se ubican. También vamos a inaugurar en octubre la exhibición La Escuelita, Oasis y Cantera en los años oscuros. Esta exhibición es parte de un trabajo colectivo llevado adelante junto al archivo de ETH Arquitectura a partir de múltiples donaciones sobre esta experiencia académica llevada a cabo en Argentina. Esta muestra se va a complementar con las jornadas de historia y crítica que estarán enfocadas en distintos modos de enseñanza en esos años tumultuosos o revolucionarios. Brevemente después vamos a recibir a Iñaki Ábalos y Renata Sienkiewicz, quienes van a estar brindando dos conferencias en su visita a la escuela. Una conferencia el día viernes titulada Segundas Oportunidades y una conferencia el día sábado donde hablarán de 10 proyectos en los que relacionan arte y arquitectura. Bueno, y para concluir también vamos a recibir a las arquitectas chilenas Cecilia Púa y Paula Velasco. Vamos a recibir a la archivista Inés Alduendo a cabo de las colecciones especiales de la Universidad de Harvard. Va a estar conversando con Isabela Moretti, la directora del archivo de Itela, sobre los archivos. Y por último, la última actividad dentro del ciclo de conferencias será la presentación del premio de ETH Arquitectura, del cual estamos muy contentos de llevar adelante en su segunda edición. Recibimos más de 40 propuestas de arquitectos y arquitectas argentinas, brasileras, chilenas, paraguayas, uruguayas, brasileras. Un premio que todavía estamos jurando con nuestros invitados de hoy. Y por fuera de este calendario se inauguró ayer la exhibición Mario Roberto Álvarez, Documentos para un archivo, una exhibición curada por Marcelo Faiden, Martín Torrado y Ricardo Fernández Rojas. Pueden visitarla en el Centro del Taller de Arquitectura. Para los que no vinieron nunca, esto es en este piso, en el segundo piso, pero en el edificio Alcorta. La exhibición va a estar abierta hasta el 17 de octubre. Los alentamos a todos a visitarla. Hay una colección de archivos inéditos del fondo Mario Roberto Álvarez, unos dibujos y unas perspectivas increíbles, con también algunos archivos misceláneos. Ayer fue una inauguración fantástica, pero capaz es bueno una segunda visita con menos gente y menos vinos para verla en detalle. Bueno, lo mejor para el final, quizás. Estamos muy contentos hoy de recibir en la escuela a la oficina suiza Christoph Gantenbein, Christoph Gantenbein y Emanuel Christ. It was a long week. I'm sorry. I was sorry to get confused. Ambos son arquitectos por la ETH de Zürich, donde actualmente ambos son profesores titulares. Han enseñado en varias universidades alrededor del mundo, como el Harvard GSD, como la Universidad de Oslo, como la Academia de Mendrisio. Fundaron su oficina juntos, luego de conocerse trabajando en la oficina de Herzog y de Meuron. Fundaron su oficina en 1998 en Basel, donde vienen llevando adelante un trabajo sistemático y riguroso basado en el análisis histórico, el estudio tipológico, el desarrollo de múltiples proyectos de vivienda colectiva y museos. Han terminado recientemente el Kunstmuseum de Basilea, el Museo Nacional de Zürich y varios proyectos más, multipremiados, reconocidos. A todos los que estén en la escuela pueden ver su trabajo en la biblioteca. Fueron muy gentiles de donar varias publicaciones que llevaron adelante y su monográfico publicado recientemente de 3 tomos, así que estamos muy agradecidos por eso. Bueno, y ahora me gustaría invitar a nuestro decano, a Marcelo Faiden, para que presente un poco más formalmente su trabajo. But Emanuel Christoph, we're very happy to have you here. I will invite Marcelo for a short speech, but thank you so much.
Gracias, Javi, gracias a todos por acercarse hoy. I promise I will be very brief. So I have to say that when we find a building from a well-known office, it's almost always take us a few seconds to associate it with its authors. It's only a few seconds and we know what we're seeing and who did it. We immediately detect certain formal gestures that sound familiar to us. We observe the use of some materials and not others. And sometimes we even recognize it by the affiliation the architects in question have with other work of other architects. I think that in my opinion, none of this happens with the work of Christoph Gantenbein. It's not easy to immediately recognize it. So the immediate reaction will be to think that our guests are starting from scratch with each new work opportunity, setting aside their disciplinary knowledge and forgetting about everything they have learned up to this point. And I think that this will be a completely wrong conclusion. Their interest in the world around us and the architecture that unfolds immediately refutes this initial impulse. Just stop by the workshop that they held at this school that can be seen in Science Valiente Pavilion. I recommend everybody after the lecture, please go and visit it. It's worth it. So to see it with the interest, to see their interest in sharing with us their vocation to look at everything around us with fresh new eyes. So I can easily imagine that the enthusiasm and extreme curiosity that infected us all this week is the same that drives them to produce their architecture. The diversity of their work is directly proportional to the size of their library. And I know that they are taking tons of books back to Basel. So only from a vast amount of knowledge they are able to tell us what kind of architecture we need at any given time and at any given space or place. But I wouldn't want to leave out this brief introduction without giving you at least one characteristic that hovers over their work. And I think that the key adjective here will be elegance. It's an elusive attribute, I have to say, ultimately uncommon, both within and outside of architecture. It's a forgotten adjective, almost forbidden in contemporary discussion at the same time. But at a certain point, I think that we all came here looking from some of that. So please, everybody, join me to welcome our guest.
Pre-warmed chair. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you so much, Marcelo, and also Javier, for the invitation and for the introduction. Is this now? Yes, that's where we are. Correct. That's who we are. What? All good?
Yeah.
Okay. Please, there is 2 more chairs. Huh? It will be long. It's highly recommended. Okay. Thank you for the elegant introduction. Okay. I have just a few notes here. So, our lecture. Actually, we'll do it together. We haven't done that in many years. I mean, teaching we do together. Lectures is a bit less often the case. We shared that idea with Sebastian this morning. He was already very intimidated, afraid of ping-pong lectures. So it's a bit of an experiment. And please be patient with us, but we make an effort. We are very happy and very proud and very honored to be here. This lecture is a tribute to the wonderful city of Buenos Aires. It's also a tribute to this school, or more precisely to the workshop that we could do and share together with many of you. Has been an extremely inspiring and beautiful experience. It's about the architecture of the city. That's the subject of the workshop. It's still there, as it has been mentioned. And it's also the rather unmodest title of this lecture that we prepared for you. So, as I guess, yes, so I have to jump in here. The architecture of the city is the title of this lecture. But in the first place, it is, as I guess everybody knows, and we spoke about it on Monday on our introduction here in this very same room, it is in the first place the title of a very famous book published by Aldo Rossi in 1966. Actually, a book that came in a moment where the modernist period comes to an end. It is a book about reconquering the city. And it was a very beautiful moment because there was a new interest in the existing buildings of the city. The historic fabric of a city. And as many of you might know, Rossi describes then in the book with this title, The Architecture of the city as a cultural artifact. And its buildings are called urban artifacts. And what's also very specifically interesting in the view of Rossi is that he introduces the notion of time in relation to the idea of permanence versus change. So the city and its architecture is always about continuity, permanence, but also change, of course. And maybe another aspect, just to give a little orientation, is that in the book he describes the structure of the city, making a distinction between ordinary buildings and monuments. So there are, in a way, the two different types of buildings: ordinary, the many buildings, and the outstanding monuments. And because it's about time and about the city, how the city is evolving and changing, it is also about the collective memory. The city is never built by one individual or few individuals, except maybe for Alvarez, who almost built a whole city, as we could see yesterday. But it's about the collective memory, and by that, amongst other aspects, it's about the notion of the type. The typical building, the type to which we can refer. And maybe reading Rossi, the subject of his treatise is mostly the European city. And that is where we would like also to reconnect and to add this last part of a short introduction that the European city, and to a certain extent also this famous book about it, is also the backdrop for our education. We got educated, we studied in Zurich mostly. The presence of this book, of this understanding of the city and its architecture, has been a very important and influential theory for us. And the European city is also still the main cultural context for the work of our office. So our practice is absolutely happening in this context. So, but anyway, so no worries. It will not be a lecture now about the theory and the history of theory of the city. It is more like, I guess, expected a lecture about some of our work. But we believe that our current work is happening in some sort in a similar situation to the one of Rossi and his contemporaries in that moment of the postmodern era. We are somehow in the postmodern era, perhaps. And we believe that given the crazy and very fast speed of demolition and reconstruction of entire cities, that we have to urgently refocus on what's already here. And there we make the connection to the workshop. We have to reconnect to what's already here and to work with what's already there. We must reconsider the way we build our cities and ultimately the planet. So social and environmental urgency is obvious. It is this, in front of this backdrop, that we would like to discuss our work. So a contemporary understanding of the architecture of the city, speaking about reusing, transforming, but of course also densifying the city in the context in which we are working. We will present 12 projects which deal, all of them, with building the city. The first project is called Typology. It is a project that started in 2010 and it is ongoing. Last week was part of that project. I said our system of reference is the European city. That's actually not completely true. In order to widen our horizon and in order to understand even better the relationship between the city and its buildings, Christoph and I, together with the whole team in Switzerland, we started a big research project. Somehow, it's a small project still, but it's happening on a global scale. We called it our own scientific, very grand tour, and it took us to many metropolises in the world, also to Buenos Aires. 14 years ago, we had the pleasure and the excitement to come here in the context of that research. And out of this research came a book, actually 2 books, and in 2 months' time, there will be a third book. They are called Typology 1, 2, and 3. And in these books, we are examining the building typologies of these cities, actually cities of the 20th century, focusing on the big city of the 20th century. In the first book is Hong Kong, New York, Rome, but also Buenos Aires. In the second book is Delhi, Sao Paulo, Paris, and Athens, so big cities. In a way, a catalogue, not as extensive perhaps as the one that we could see today, but somehow in a similar interest. And the third book that will come out now is about Tashkent in Uzbekistan, Genoa in Italy, Tbilisi in Georgia, and Casablanca in Morocco. So we're very excited to share that very soon with you too, and then we will send you a copy also to complement our modest presence in your wonderful library. So it's actually a collection of building types. We called it very boldly, and you know that's a wonderful thing also with teaching. It is pretty simple. It is a toolbox. And maybe I should say the project typology is not just a research project, it's also a teaching project. Because what we are proposing in this first volume is that it's not just about documenting, it's about using these types. Therefore, we speak of typology transfer. A type can be transferred and transformed. And in this understanding, in very short, typology, maybe even different from Aldo Rossi, is not so much about the frozen truths of architecture that is permanently true forever, but typology is a dynamic, creative mechanism of constant transfer and transformation. I think that's very, very important. That's also why we believe it is worth to study and document the building types of a city. So it is a catalog, as I said. That's a spread of the book. In this case, New York, drawings, photographs. We never up to now did build physical models. There is axons, but the models is a different dimension, obviously, as we could see. Oh, but what's that? It's a wrong. That's the right one. Voila. It's an index. There could be a whole story about how to classify and create families, which is maybe less important right now. And because you know it and we mentioned it, I think we can show you that there is a basic understanding of the wonderful city of Buenos Aires, even though we are not here to teach you about that. But there is the beginning of a project that can endlessly be continued. The Casa Chorizo is the first family that is represented here. In different variations, it goes on, it gets more complex. The pasaje, or I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, is then the next type. When the street is entering the block, the system's getting more complex. You see the density. Without understanding and without having the time to go into detail, we see the complexity and the richness of the plan. But then also we understand with increasing pressure, the city is getting vertical, but the lots are the same. So I'm not speaking about authorship yet. I'm just speaking about the stupid rules of the city, the constraints, and what is interesting, it is producing perhaps the most exciting architecture, even without big city planning. Of course, the intelligence of the architects come into play, and there is even one example, which is a very famous one by Clorindo Testa. We found that at the time, and we were charmed by it, but we are also even more impressed maybe by more generic buildings. It's also beautiful to see that the city, the ordinary and the monument, is the cultural center, the theater, a monument? In a way, yes, but in this case, it's squeezed into the logic of the grid, of the manzana, which we've also learned yesterday with the wonderful drawings in the exhibition, how important it is. So you see, there is layers of knowledge, and we come back to Buenos Aires and we learn more. We see original drawings, so the research and the investigation is never finished. And that's the last page. It's longer, but there's the last page. Also, I guess, with one of the last buildings by Alvarez, the American Express Bank, to the bottom right, which we loved at the time so much and we still do today. That was the first project. Now comes the second project, and we take on speed.
So the second project that we're going to show you is the first project that we built. Emanuel was presenting this typology as a collection of a system of reference, and in this case, it was you get your first commission, a small multi-family house, 4 apartments in a villa neighborhood in the outskirts of Zurich. But this plot was next to the railway, so of course the villas, they occupied the nicer area there, and it was a kind of a leftover. It was a workshop building there before. So the typology, the classical typology of the villa in this plot didn't make sense. So we started with the question, what is the system of reference for this project? And we did exactly what we did this week with the students here. We did a field trip in order to do a kind of a portrait of architecture along the railway, to kind of find out what is the architectonical theme, the subject, when building along the railway. And we did, we took an old car that we could get, and we did this trip from Zurich to Basel, 100 kilometers, and we systematically took these portrait photos of these small scale workshop buildings, industrial buildings like this one, and we tried to systematize the repetition, highly economically built, very rational built, extremely pragmatic, very functional. And of course they have this beauty, already a bit over, 1970s, but they have the beauty of this very modest but very applied modernism. It's not a kind of designed architecture which is designed to represent. It's this kind of architecture which you would hardly even perceive, no? And it and we learned from these examples very directly. So we really looked at it, and we took over elements, typology of it, construction of it, constructional detail, like these very traditional shutters with this lamella, but also the colors, these kind of grayish colors. It's not a proud architecture, it's a kind of a little bit sad, melancholic architecture. And we directly translated this into a project. So we said, still talking about the villa neighborhood and housing, but we say, in this, you can see in this section on the right-hand side, it's the section through the railway, so it's very close. It has a really physical, aesthetical, but also acoustical relationship to this railway. So we really built a factory building instead of a housing. So you can see the horizontal window, the ribbon windows. We even were more radical. We said, a factory building, a workshop building doesn't have any balconies, but of course people who live here would like to have an exterior space. So we built staircases, but these traditional galvanized steel staircases going up to the roof terrace or going down to the courtyard. This is another facade. So also this railing on the roof, the garage window, the garage opening in the front. It's all directly taken from this catalog that we built up. And even in the floor plan, you can see even the typology is based on a constructional system using a very clear regular grid. It's not a typical floor plan for housing, but it's prefabricated concrete columns. And then somehow the rooms, they deal with this industrial structure of the plan. And this is how it looks. You can see the railway, you can see this grayish color. It's not monochromous, but so we really just a different grays, and the window is a slightly different gray from the rendering, from the concrete socle. And so it is, it really, we were cultivating this expression of the industrial workshop building. You can see in the window the mirroring of the electrical lines of the railway, and on the left-hand side, part of the second volume you saw in the floor plan. Also here, very pragmatic detail, sun protection, just from outside, mounted on the wall. Steel windows, these prefabricated slim columns, an industrial floor. And of course, it is not just a story, but the conviction is that by choosing this architecture, which is traditionally built along railways, for instance, that you build up a relation to this railway, also physically, that these windows face the railway, and they accept it as a reality, and this building wants to stand at the railway, that you would also transform such a specific quality, like this position at the railway, from a potential problem into a quality, because it's somehow beautiful, no? You know, these beautiful Hopper paintings, the building, houses at the railway. It is a quality, it's something specific, and to go for the specific potential of such a situation is our aim in every project.
So, different context, but you understand, so it is about a type, but it's also the specific context, which maybe tells something about the fact that each project is maybe dealing with different things, even though we can also see, I believe, a continuity. One continuity is that we still love the color and the shades of gray. This is a gray building in Paris, actually recently completed. That's a construction site a couple of years ago. It is a social housing structure, about 110 apartments, which are added to this fragment of a typical Parisian block. It's in the 15th arrondissement district of Paris, so it's in the city center of Paris. You see the white empty field maybe in the center of the image of the photograph. That's a specific thing. So it's the Parisian block. That's one part of the context. Haussmann and 19th century Paris, the perimeter block. The white empty field, though, is a railway track field where the metro cars from Paris are being repaired. So it's actually a crossover of a traditional, or let's say conventional understanding of an urban space, which is the street, but also the backyard of this railway infrastructure. And the project is rebuilding the workshops for the trains, and on top, the housing. I don't know whether, is there a point that works? No, maybe on this side you see, this is the project. It's a bar, it's a stretched linear figure attached to an element of the block, but freestanding like a modern structure on the other end. So it's a bit both. It's belonging to these two different systems. And this is the plan. It only has 3 staircases, small apartments, 9 per floor per stairs. So we immediately understand, without being able maybe to read the details of the plan, that there is a notion of economy at play. It's about organizing the distribution system with an interior street, if you will, but there is always, every staircase has a direct connection to the outside with a window. This is also typology. And why is this possible? Because the volume of the building, the plan, has this recessed moment when the plan, redond in French, like a meandering plan. And this we directly learned from our typological research from typical Parisian plans of the 20th century. Old Paris was a straight facade, and the street was linear and continuous. And in the 20th century, the modern architects still respected the rules of the Parisian block, but they started to introduce this variation. And we tried to use that on the two sides. So it's the logic of the meandering plan that made it possible to actually come to a layout which is quite generous for social housing, because the square meters, the distances, you might know that this is similar in every country. You know, there is very strict rules. It's on the square centimeters actually. But what we try to show here in this part of a plan here, this is like 1/2. You see that one apartment is offering a sequence of different spaces. It's a layering, and by that, it's sometimes tiny rooms. So it's a small room after a small room, but by doing that, we are offering depth, perspective, and we believe also spatial generosity particularly because there are big openings in some parts. This is the kitchen. We have to do it twice. This is the kitchen. And we introduced the rule that the kitchen is connected with a double door to the room in front. And then there is a third element, so there's a room, no, it's the entrance, the room, the kitchen, and then the loggia. The loggia doesn't count because it's a free, empty space. It's like a balcony. We learned here very often this can then translate into a garden in the context of Buenos Aires. Now we saw the wonderful project in O'Higgins this morning. But here we said maybe, especially because we're talking about small apartments, we transform the balcony that is not counted in the overall calculation, translates into a room like in a unheated buffer zone loggia space. And you can recognize the arrows. So it's about the view, it's about the series of the space, it's the meandering plan offering different depths. So we can even create moments where you have the transversal orientation. This is not rocket science. It's in the end a very modest ambition to offer rooms which have a more or less decent proportion, a window, a relationship to an adjacent room, and maybe even the perspective through the whole building. This is actually what we try to arrange in this very dense plan. And this is a few images where you see now the enfilade, which is also the series, the sequence, the perspective from the living room into the kitchen, in this case, because the building also has some setback on the top. Also that is taken from our research, if you will. We see now, or I hope you can get an impression of the richness, the spatial richness that is created. That's the moment when then the building is attached to the neighbor. And you see the diagonal views, or at least you believe me that there is these views. The loggia in front of us to the left. So most of the time you can use it as a small dining area in direct relation to the kitchen, which we see on the right. And this is the proof that it is Paris. And this is the beauty, the poetic beauty of this elementary language of architecture of the everyday. The analogies of which Christoph was speaking. A railway, maybe grey, sad architecture is not so sad. Also in Paris, the classical window, the heating, that's it. No, a skirting at the bottom, voila. It's a very, the walls are 5 centimeters thick. It's a very light construction. And that's the outside. That's the freestanding end. We can read a stepping back volume, one type of window. When we get closer, you see that was the construction of the neighbor. It is a bit more complicated because there is a workshop underneath. It's raw, or almost very little treated steel panels. One type of window. So the building speaks a language which is familiar to the place, if you will, but at the same time, it is also making a difference. This is Christoph Gantenbein. It has a clear principle, it's a typological order, it speaks to the context, but it tries to emancipate from it with a crossover strategy. It's grey, it has vertical proportions, it looks for the alignment with the neighbor, but it's breaking its physical attitude by using metal. That is speaking maybe of the presence of the industry of the car or the train fabrications, etc.
So the term of type and typology was mentioned several times. Type meaning an abstract group of features which define a group of objects. Of course, tonight we speak about architecture, which are related to function, to use, but also to construction, how it is built. And of course, these types, which kind of are as a kind of a solution for a typical problem. Like, for instance, here in Buenos Aires, you have these very deep plots, very narrow, very deep plots, high pressure of economical pressure. So there are different types who deal with this set of questions, with the geometry of a plot, with the use of housing, for instance, which needs light and air, also with the way of construction, which is different in 19th century than in 20th century. So these kind of types, they also help us to do architecture, and as I was showing in the first one, we referred to kind of types which were existing, these workshop buildings along the highway. Emanuel was showing this Paris example, which refers to built architecture which you find, and of course, as a set of conditions which lead to such a type is always changing, which is in 22, 25 a different one than a generation ago. These types are always also changing slightly, so a type is not fixing. But these changes can go very slowly, as housing is not something completely different from the question of housing in 100 years ago, for instance. But there are moments, and Rafael Moneo in his important text on typology describes this, that in certain moments new types emerge. And I would like to show you this project where we were kind of forced to develop a new type for certain reasons that I will explain you immediately. So this is a high-rise, again at the highway, at the railway, with a socle, with offices, ground floor with a coffee bakery shop, offices, and then a high, for you in Buenos Aires not so high, for Switzerland quite high, high rise with housing with this very specific physiognomy that has its reasons. The reason behind is this diagram. You can see on top of this diagram there would be the railway, and the darker the louder it is. And you can see the adjacent buildings, these rectangular buildings, that not only the facades facing the railway are completely in this dark area, but also the side facades. So what we had to do, and this is a kind of a legal constraint as the building codes prescribe this, in order to be able to open a window, and you have to open a window in housing, this is a condition, you have to turn this potential rectangle 45 degrees, and we found out that this rhombus would provide at least two facades. It looks a bit dark on the here. It looks a bit dark, but this is green, so this is unproblematic. Whereas this is really hardcore, exposed to the noise. So this geometry, this of this tower is a pure technical, scientific reaction to the noise problem. So architectonical form is directly related to noise, to physicality of noise, but also to the regulation. So building laws, and in Switzerland these kind of acoustic regulations are super tough, can have also an impact, and there were no precedents because these laws are relatively new. So we were forced to develop this volume, which is not a type yet. You can see this section, ground floor, this socle for this podium for offices, and then this tower for the housing. And the specific solution, the invention, one could say the typological invention, is this fan floor plan with a staircase in the corner, which you would normally not do. Normally you put the staircase in the center because you don't need any light. High rise, you wouldn't use the staircase anyway. But you would put it there where you have the noise, and profit with all the apartments from the sunny south side and from the side which is not facing the noise. So it is a kind of precarious type, because these apartments are very deep. You can see the ones along the facade, they have at least light, but not openable windows, but in the center they are 12, 13 meters deep with light from only one side. This is the socle with these offices. This is much less problematic, of course. And then it's a question as an architect what you do with this very rational construction of such a, or a development of such a type. And we were appreciating and also very excited in giving and in finding a form for this specific organization of the floor plan. So this staircase is completely closed, and then these windows, which are opening slightly like an eye, which is opening. Somehow they tell about this noise, which is not optically visible, but architecture is very much about optical perception. So the form of these windows and the form of this architecture tells about this protective character of the body and of the facade, which has to do with this noise. The socle, of course, with these offices doesn't need it, so it works in a different way. And therefore, through this form of this closed staircase, the relationship to the railway, again, as in the example before, is built up because it is a direct transformation of physical, acoustical reality into architectonical form. These other images that show also this facade. It's another metal facade, so we liked to show, also to give expression to the fact that we can bend these metals. No, it's not a brick or massive facade, but the softness of these metal sheets around the corner, they tell about this skin-like character of this materiality. Also here we liked it very much in the ground floor, these different geometries coming together in this precarious point. Entrance to the offices are separated from the entrance to the apartments, and then you have this very specific space. This is the window with this non-openable window, which are well, it's a perspective, but it's more than the perspective. It's a window that really changed its height along this side facade, and so it's about a building which is really in its character, in its expression, in the way how it is built, through an inner logic related to the place where it is built along this railway.
So we are starting to find our rhythm, so we can count I stopped counting the projects, but we are somewhere on our way. Voltamete housing is a project that came sort of rather early in our career. It's actually not in a chronological order, it's just some order. And you see I don't know whose finger is holding the model up, but it's maybe important as a symbolic image that there is the hand of the human, or the humans, maybe, plural. As much as we are stressing the rationality of architecture, and as much as we do speak about the rules and the constraints of an urban context, we also do believe and we know that intuition, the personal gesture, the force of the design, the decision making on the drawing board, whether it's a digital one or a physical one, is of course absolutely central also to our work. I'm using this image because you can already see it's a big urban figure, it's a house or a residential building, and you see a seemingly free form on the side of the courtyard, which it is. This is the aerial view. In the foreground we see a triangular plot or block, and there you can recognize again this figure in a dark color, but you can maybe see it's a sort of a soft movement on the side of the courtyard. What is specific about the courtyard? Here we see it now sort of flipped almost 180 degree. The tip on the north. Our building is running from west to east, almost horizontally in the image. This is in Basel. On the right hand side you can see the river, the Rhine. This is the river that is running from Switzerland up to Germany and the Netherlands. Even on this image is already a bit of France, and on the other side of the river is Germany. Just to give you a bit of an indication also that we are living in a border city, which I think is quite interesting, speaking about that maybe more than a territorial scale. To come back here, what's the problem? It's obvious. It's not easy to deal with a sort of regular triangular form, because you have 60 degrees angles in the block. And as much as I started to speak about the free form and maybe also the intuition of creating a free movement in a plan, again, we're back to rational. Because there started our line. If you take the 60-degree angle, it's a pain. How to organize a space around this angle, or how do you deal with two apartments that are sort of facing each other? So we started to widen up the angle a bit, and also to start to move the line. So it was almost like the geometrical problem in the plan was sort of affecting the formation of our block, or our piece of the block. And there is another thing, the courtyard is on the north. So all the apartments have a noisy street in the south, and then a very beautiful, quiet garden on the north. By bending and tilting the facade, by zigzagging it, we intended to introduce an orientation that is leaning to the west or to the east. So in the end, it's not that irrational at all. But what's interesting, by having introduced the movement into the plan, and by that, similar to Paris, I was speaking about the meander. This is maybe a less mathematically organized form of a meander. The depth of the plan is varied strongly. We have, I think the maximum depth is like 18 meters without the balcony. And in the most narrow part, we are around 6 meters. It's also stepping back a little bit, similar to the Paris project. So what we are doing, we are sort of creating a dramatic problem to our own plan. And that's what you do when you do a project. You use all your creativity to produce a serious problem, and then you take the rest of your creativity and intelligence and you try to solve it. And the type of the apartment, and in that sense it's a very typological project again. It's one type. It's not even a variation of types maybe, but it's a variation within a type. It's stressing the limits and testing the limits of a type. The type is simple. Maybe I like this one as an example because you see from the staircase, or maybe you don't see, but you follow. We enter one big space that is transversal to the street with a loggia or with a veranda and a balcony to the garden, and then adjacent to this main central room, which is also a distribution space, you have then a certain number of rooms. The kitchen stands in the middle of the space. And now, just as a reaction to the geometry, we find 45 different floor plates in the end, including some variations in the section. But it's actually, we could argue, always the same type, with beautiful exceptions. Of course, the first one that I'm showing you is the corner, where one apartment is then bending around the corner. This is at the one tip of the figure, just to give you an impression. And in the upper floors there are the duplex apartments, where it's getting even more narrow. And when we spoke about the project at the time, and that's maybe another connection to our portrait of Buenos Aires, we were quite romantic and said, look, how can we possibly produce a building that is offering moments like in an old town, like structures that we love so much, a weird building in the backyard in the 19th century, I don't know, because that's the memory. That's the memory that we have as designers, and we remember these spaces. And we tried to trick ourselves and to produce a system that is actually offering these types. A few more views, the garden, and then the straight line on the boulevard.
that's another project which deals with the relation of the city and the building, which is a bridge. Of course, we developed it with engineers, but we somehow had a lead. This is the model of this bridge, and it is situated. You can see on the lower part the Aarau, which is a provincial town, historical town with this medieval structure and former fortification. And this bridge is a very important connection. It has been there since the Roman times and then renewed over and over. There was a beautiful construction in the 19th century which was destroyed in the 1930s and replaced by another one. So when we were commissioned, we won a competition, then were commissioned to replace this old bridge from the 1930s. You can see here this historical drawing maybe from 19th century, which shows very strongly the relation of the city and of this bridge. So this helped us to find an attitude, a set of ideas which were important to us, namely to understand the bridge as a part of the built substance of the city, not to understand it as a technical piece for engineering, but because it is so close to this historical and also protected listed city, we were ambitious to blur it in, or to really physically and aesthetically connect it to the substance, to the materiality of the city. And something that helped was the fact that the forerunner bridge from the 1930s had fundaments which had to be reused for economical reasons, so this was a condition of the competition. So you wouldn't necessarily just span one bridge over the whole river, but you would use these fundaments. And when developing it, we were starting with this very archaic image of a bridge. Now, how would a child draw a bridge? It's the arches, and of course this image, this idea of a bridge has to do with the structural system, the load-bearing system of a stone bridge, which for us was a very adequate image in relation to this historical city. But then, of course, which came very well together, these arches, together with the fact that there were these existing fundaments. So these were drawings of these three arches overspanning the water and smaller arches spanning over on the riverboard, where you would have passes, ways along the river where people are jogging and walking their dogs and bicycling. But then the question, of course, would arise: how would you transform such an image, such an idea of a bridge, into a modern system? And of course, it's not a stone bridge anymore, but it is concrete. And when talking about types, and you could call the arch bridge a type, it is a solution for a typical problem. But then types can change when the conditions change, and the construction here is a crucial condition. So the concrete brings this massivity of the arch under pressure. Concrete works in a different way and has different potential. So we developed this load-bearing system with the engineer, which this is you can see this distorted geometry, which translated this stone bridge into concrete. And you can see, of course, you wouldn't build a stone bridge like that. Stone bridge would be much more massive. You couldn't span so wide, so flat. So alone the geometry is already a kind of a direct expression of this system. But you can also see when you go closer that concrete allows you to go much slimmer. So these holes in these pillars are not just showing the potential, but also they are a means to make it more economical, to save material for economical, but also for ecological reasons, to reduce the concrete, which is, as we all know, in terms of the CO2 footprint, a problematic material, but for such a street bridge, the material which is suitable. So the potential of the concrete to make it more elegant and more slim was fully experienced here, and you can see then the potential of these holes that add new possible views. Mainly also here, when you know that along these rivers there is, as it is a very central site in the city, lots of people are walking. It is not just a tunnel crossing the bridge, but somehow the most attractive way how, as a pedestrian walking along the river, you would experience the load-bearing system, you would experience how the bridge is touching the water, which is it's a very attractive place. So it is the evolution of a type thanks to the potential of contemporary construction.
Okay, this is a project, by the way, with the exception of the first one that we showed, I mean, or the second one, the house on the railway, the grey house. These were all competitions. So in Switzerland and in Europe, this is almost the format in which you can also build up your career. It's extremely demanding, and it's a strong competitive context in which we still work. It's super tough sometimes, but it's also generous. Also, as young architects, you can build up your career with open competitions. And this is just a side note. This is in Munich, speaking about the architecture of the city at large. So adding to the city, continuing, densifying the city. This is a very specific case. It is a big complex in Munich near the main station. It's a post-distribution center from the 1920s. And it's a very strange, big development of at the time. You see there's a 2-story house, perimeter block with a pitched roof. It's a bit to blend into the neighborhood. But then in the center, in the inside of this big block, you have a distribution hall. This is the circular hall, so industrial architecture actually. There is another hall that is like a bridge spanning from one side to the other, a big hall, and this is our project. So, different from other competitors, we decided to somehow continue the logic of this contrast of a small-scale house at the perimeter, and then big, simple, repetitive structures in the inside, or like a ladder system, if you will. Here you see the plan with the addition on the left hand here of this housing building. It's again, maybe it's an invention, but it's also an analogy. Again, our design is somewhere in between. It's a quite rough transformation of the existing. In plan, you see it is a densification. What used to be a big open space here is now 2 spaces with this bar. So it's radically different than before, but also it somehow belongs to the system which we found already established on the site. And we like this section very much. The intervention on the left is 1 floor underground with parking, a second one for technical spaces and storage, and then it's just a bar, but it's slightly tilting where the roof is introducing a second layer in the perimeter, if you understand what I'm trying to say. So this line is of course having an effect on this figure. And this is interesting, having spoken about the problems you're creating. The floor plate is also changing, and this has a potential, or this shows a potential for also variations then in the organization of the apartments. It's all about apartments. And look at this, it's simple. There is one thing, that's where the kink is. For the rest, it's one grid, it's repetitive, it's like a shelves, it's like a bookshelves. Sometimes urban architecture has to be boring. It's also about anonymity. We like the idea that you can then put different types of apartments and loggias and other spaces into the regularity of a quiet, beautiful grid. Sorry, this is again the section of which I spoke, I think with the 7 floors, and that's how it looks. The side is closed, it's cladded in ceramics, it stands out, it's not following the roof and the tiles of the roof. It's a light gray, it's almost white. Sebastian and Marcelo, we are not there yet to really build a white building, but we're getting close, and this is but you will also see we fall back into gray and many other things. This is a very simple architecture. We also have to say we learned then that the beauty and the stupidity of the grid is also quite robust. The inside, we have to confess, the plans is a developer who then sold all the apartments, followed then also the rules of the market that we could not fully control. That's new experience for us as Swiss architects, being used to the fact that we control every single detail. This is a slightly different reality. Real estate development, what is important? It's the urban figure, it's the main guidelines for a project, and by that we try to guarantee the quality of the place.
So now I have the pleasure, after 109 slides, to introduce a project which is not grey, which is this office and apartment building. This is the model, in a beautiful situation in our office where interns were building it. It's in the center of Hamburg. You can see here this church. This is a city map of mid-19th century. You can see here the Elbe river, which is connected to the sea, and the reason for the huge port until functioning today. And you can see all the water currents, these flates, in which define the structure of the city. So this was the historic city, which was cultivated, and it still looked like this in 20th century. You can see this very proud 1930s, 2030s building around this church. So the historical medieval city, it transformed through the ages, through the times. It was modernized in 19th century, in 20th century, but then of course it was the disaster of the World War II, which, as many German cities, completely destroyed the city. And the city planners also took it as a chance. I mean, it sounds cynical, but to transform on the ruins of a historical city, to transform it into a modern city, and use this empty land for a kind of a highway-like Ost-West-Straße, East-West Street, which was just crossing this center, and which is somehow still there. You can see it in this plan, no? This axis, which is connecting the city. So this is somehow the brutal reality of this place. And when we were dealing with this project, also a competition, somehow we felt this ambiguous situation. Of course, you are nostalgic about, if you see these historic plans and images, about the former beauty of this place, and the loss that this balance of the built structure of the buildings, which form the public space, the squares, the places, and the streets, and the mass is completely changed through this modernist understanding with a highway, with very functional understanding, and then buildings like this curtain wall building in the rear, which was built along this highway, which introduces a completely different system of city. So we were also, when we were young, we were doing our internship in Berlin or studying there, when this whole question about the city repair was discussed. Steinernes Berlin, or the stone Berlin out of stone, was discussed. So it left traces, but of course we are not naive, and it's not about reconstructing the 19th century city. But I would say in this project we tried to find answer to the challenges. If we can improve, there was a cheap 1960s structure there, if we can improve the quality of the urban space by building an architecture which defines this urban space in a different way, and at the same time not ignore the fact that there are modern buildings. Now you can see this brutalist building in the front, you can see this high rise, which is somehow, as a building, it's a nice it's a good architecture. No? So the modern, the reality of the modern city, also the importance of the traffic is there, but nevertheless this building, our red brick building, also relates somehow to a traditional understanding of the city, where the buildings are understood as a mass and they define in a precise way the public space. So we developed this very dense facade. It's a mainly office building, so this part is the office building. So an office building is very generic. What do they want? They want an elevator and empty spaces where they can do whatever they do. So what you can control as an architect is the facade. But this is exactly what was interesting for us here, by creating a facade which is addressing the public space. This is the facade facing the water. So the dense one is the office building, and the other one, which is more generous, more open, is the housing with these balconies facing the water. And as we said, the only thing we have is the facade. Inside, anyway, they will do what they want. So we invested a lot of architectonical interest and energy into this facade, and we made it much stronger than it actually needs to be by introducing these columns. So it's not a kind of a volume which is perforated by openings, one could say, but it's a very dense row of columns which leaves spaces which are the openings, which are the windows. So this is the facade. These columns, of course, they have to do with the rhythm for office spaces. And the beauty of these plastical columns is that, for instance, if you see it like that, the windows, the openings disappear, and what remains is just the beauty of the material. And this is one of the lots of beautiful aspects of our profession, that we deal with materials. And in this case, the investor was even willing to really find a beautiful brick which was burned in a kiln which was, I think, 150 years old, run by a family in a wooden shed. Really beautiful, happy bricks. Traditional craftsmanship, which is very, very traditional here in northern Germany. So it is a traditional material produced in a traditional way to create a kind of a traditional facade. At the same time, it's a very modern building, also in its scale, in its use, and in its position. So, and we love this image very much, where you can see this, also this volume. It's a kind of in the back there's a bridge. So it is not just standing in a row of houses, but it is freestanding with three sides, and also creating a kind of entrance gate to this bridge situation. And this is a close-up with the green windows, the green with the red, but it's also a traditional color in the reference architecture which we were always talking about. I don't know if you know this kind of proto-modern 1920, 1930 modern architectures like the Chile house by Fritz Höger, which was a lot about the potential of the brick, and they often have also these green windows. And then it's a red soccle, so there's a slight differentiation. As we say, the soccle is really important. Also, to open the facade, you cannot have this hermetic facade of the office building in the ground floors. To create an urban potential and a relation between this gastronomy and the potential gastronomy and the sidewalk public space. And then this entrance you can see on the left-hand side, it's the entrance to the housing, and on the right-hand side, this very symbolic concrete piece which is showing where the entrance would be. Section is very generic, structure is very generic, so it's all about this facade, which is even slightly bent here, following the water. So the geometry of this water current, of this historic, also natural water current, is informing the house. So the house really follows the spaces of the city, so the space of this channel, the space of the street. And the housing, where you have this column on your balcony. So many pictures. Yes. And you can see, of course, it's somehow monumental and really very strong through its materiality, but it also, thanks to the geometry that it follows this water, also thanks to the partition in these two buildings, the housing and the office, it finds also a dialogue with these existing buildings, which sometimes are quite okay, from the 60s reconstruction. So at the end, it's also just one brick next to all the other buildings, which together creates the city.
Okay. I think it's we're good, well advanced. And we were heavily, strongly encouraged to rather show too much than too little. And so if it's going a bit too long, it's not our fault, it's Javier's fault. And also we like to share as much with you as we can. So actually this next project is a small campus. The model is not as beautiful as the models that we're having downstairs. It's a campus, it's in Germany, but very close to Basel. Roche Pharmaceutical is a big company, grew over 100 years, blah, blah. 1950s, this was an important factory ground, and then the buildings that we see on this part of the model is the office buildings. And this is transforming now into a campus of research and administration, so it's becoming sort of a modernized part of the campus, modernized in the sense that it is the modernization of a typical modern part of the city. A different context, you understand. It's Hamburg, it has a completely different layout. This is the grid. It's the open grid and the open field of a modern development. And you can probably see, or this is that's the historic main building, and then it's about the free positioning of new building blocks. This is the context. I'm tempted to say not happy bricks, but happy modernism. It's light, it's elegant, it's a bit corporate. And maybe this is a bit disturbing for you guys, but we find this as beautiful and as intriguing as the waterfront of Hamburg. And our attitude towards the city and its architecture is everywhere the same. We try to produce, to design, to build buildings which are reflecting what's around them and which are enhancing and contributing something to this place. So they are proposing slight change, sometimes stronger, sometimes more subtle. And this is the first project. Actually, this is a bit of a, I'm cheating, this is one out of two buildings on that side. But we count it as one project in the presentation. It's a small building, 3 stories. It's an office building, classical modern type. This is a beautiful concrete model. It's so heavy that we can't move it anymore from the office. And this is how it's built. The modern slab, it's almost a cartoon of modern architecture. If you look at it a bit more precisely, and it's not just a distortion of the perspective, we can maybe recognize that the 3 slabs are of different width or height. So there is a composition happening. The ground is slightly unstable. The weight of every slab is increasing to the top. And by that we imagine that the building would be contained, and it's not the potentially endless repetition of modernity, but it's a contained, composed figure. The other thing that we see here is open loggias. You can recognize the glass, it stops at some point, so one part of the building is open. This is the invention, that's all, in this case. You see the plan, generic architecture we might say. It's an elongated rectangle, and the stairs, the lifts, and some service spaces in the center, and the ring of office spaces around it. But we could convince the clients that maybe 20% of the floor plate would be left open for sort of free adaptation. It's not a very big deal. But still, this costs money. And so he said, no, let's try. And that's important also. Why? Because this factory is transforming step by step into a campus, as I tried to say. So we made the case that just this open section of the office building is maybe what makes the space around it something different. It becomes a public place. The building is addressing the outside. And actually it's also, in the meantime, it is used for more informal working or also just maybe recreation or phone calls or whatever. Maybe less smoking, because this is strictly forbidden in this campus, but it is about the other activity within the corporate framework of an office and campus. And that's the view from the inside of the floor to the outside. You see the black and the white. This is the type and the structure, the hardcore element of the building. And you see the carpet. Whether you believe it or not, we designed the carpet as well. The carpet, and this is typological again, because the carpet says, I do not belong to the building. You can take me out. The layout of the floor is free. It's a hollow double floor. So it's like a free pattern. So the hierarchical understanding of which we spoke, the grid in Munich, or also the facade in Hamburg, which is to a certain extent not independent, but in the foreground to what's happening behind, it's a different reading of a similar logic here. And you can see some glass walls. It is our reflection on modern architecture in this specific condition. But you see now the building on the right, the open loggia. Can you see it on the image? And then you see the box in the center. That's the second building that we built later. It's the central building in this part of the campus. This so-called public space is still in the making around it. And this is just the box. But it's a slightly special box because the corners are open. Corporate, modern architecture, but with a twist. That was the intention. You see a vertical space, and all of a sudden, the integrity of the object is put into question. And this is again related to how we conceived the building. Here you see it in the long facade with an entrance to the side here. Actually, it has an entrance to every side. You will find out. You see the bracing. So it's a partly very transparent, partly opaque building. It's not so clear. That's the section. It's 5 times the same floor height, but there is a double height space in its belly in the center of the building. And this is maybe giving a hint at the structure. It's about empty space in the center. I'm tempted to say what was the loggia in office building number 1 is now the empty space in office building number 2. We took the plaza inside the building, and this is the structure. That's the plan of the building. Actually, it's not even the structure. You see the 4 twin walls in the 45 angle in the corner. I mean, we think it's a beautiful plan. It's empty in the center. It's just 2 rings of columns. Where you see the walls are the stairs. You saw the bracing in the facade. That's giving the stability. These walls are just for fire protection of the stairs. So you could even take them out for structural reasons. It's in that sense, it's not a huge building. It's 55 by 35 meters. But it starts to offer a variation to the famous open space office landscape with the 4 columns in the 4 corners. And this is actually quite interesting because it's the inversion of the type. Christoph spoke about moments when you are motivated, obliged, forced to make a typological invention. This is maybe another small typological invention because the auditorium or the temporarily used forum in the center provoked this typological reaction. And of course, it's not about being traditional in the end. We love to say we are traditional architects, but in every project, every architect is always seeking the innovation, the new thing, the different, right? So within this established frame of established modernism, if you will, we created this type. It's a quite democratic building because there is no hierarchy. You can move like almost in a stadium. And we described the building, I should say that at the Universidad Itella, we described it very much like as a university or school building. Because it's not just an office building. It is pretty flexible. I don't want to be too long on that. You see there are different variations. We build huge model. You see the spaces. There are 2 types or 3 types of spaces. The main grid in the center, a ring around it with a zone of other office and meeting places there, and then this space here. And this is then the possibility to even use and subdivide this big space in different ways. And this is the most specific. That's a frontal view to the stairs. You see the modern pavilion that I showed you in the beginning. It's oblique, so we are off the grid in a way, in our direction. So that's the non-rectangular view. That's the view to the outside. Generous stairs. The open corner, 4 times in each of the corners. And that's the view to the inside. Perhaps a bit esoteric for you because I know it better than you do, but we were overly excited that when you enter the floor, you hit the system of the grid by 45 degrees. That's the column. It's a red floor on the main auditorium level, where we get now here a sense of this double height space in the center, but then you have also these more intimate moments under the grid, where we varied the layout according to the current needs. The transparency in the horizontal, and then even the reflection of which I spoke earlier, and we like the fact that this space is somehow connected to the other that I introduced earlier. So this is a campus architecture in a corporate world that is heavily transforming, actually. This came during COVID, and it was very interesting that in the beginning of the project, the idea what an office space is was a completely different one from when we ended the project. This as a side note. Is it okay? 3 more projects? Are you? I mean, we also have more. We can always add some more if you want. But okay.
You have one
Yeah, sure.
If anybody needs.
If anybody needs more
before Faiden. Okay. So this is the Museum of Fine Arts. I think after a couple of projects we can maybe abridge or shorten the theoretical part and just talk about the project. But nevertheless, I mean, all the projects that you have seen, they come from a very specific context. And in this case, the context is twofold. Well, it's the city, it's a historical, medieval city of Basel, but it's also the direct neighbor of this of the project, which is this existing 1930s museum, which is still part of the of this institution. So you can see here this 1930s building, and this is our extension. So along the along the geometry of the site is completely different. This was built as this kind of typical 19th century. This was the fortification of the historical city. The medieval city. It had kind of like a star-shaped medieval part which were reaching out, but this was somehow like in Vienna, the fortifications which were then transformed into the 19th century city. So that's where the building is sitting. So where does now the project belong? Does it belong to the city, to the to this historical texture? Is it also? But it is also at the same time, of course, part of the same institution. They are connected underground, which doesn't make it easier as an architect because they belong together. How do you express as an architect that this is an extension if there is no physical relation? So in the competition, other project teams, they proposed a bridge that would bridge this street, which is somehow, of course, a functional feature, but also an architectonical feature because it builds up this relationship. We just another one. We this even if they are typologically quite different, and it's a courtyard and a more massive compact building, that they would refer to each other, or the new one would refer to the historic one by using a set of typological, formal, physical tools which builds up this relationship. I mean, this is this not very beautiful 19th century, 20th century building built by a relative of Emanuel's and Paul Bonatz, the famous German architects from that time. So it is a really beautiful house, defined by a very sober, modern classicism. So it applies modern a modern aesthetic. It's very, very clean, but of course it still has the features like a socle, like the symmetry, like the natural stone, also a kind of a roof indication. And we translated this into a kind of a contemporary way. So the height responds to the building. We transformed or translated this stone, the massivity of the stone, into a more contemporary material, which is the brick, which is of course, brick has been used for thousands of years, but it's also a very industrial material. We also translated typological features like these vertical windows in the first floor, and then in the top floor the zenithal light, which leads to closed facade, and also this display the game of different colors in the stone. We translated it in different colors of the brick. So it is somehow taking over the categories of form, but also making a variation to it in a contemporary way. And that's how it looks. It is this dialogue of two buildings which use similar means, but are at the same time independent from each other. I mean, this is, I think, an important issue in architecture, is this balancing out, not doing compromises, but being decisive and balancing it out. There is one specific feature which is this frieze with these letters here, which we felt the need for to break this kind of... a museum is mainly creating interior spaces because you need walls, often artificial light or skylights. So the museum is per se, out of its typology, a kind of a rather closed box. And of course you can create entrance, you can create windows, but the frieze was also a way of using the beauty of a closed volume, because the brick is per se a beautiful material, and the closed surface. I mean, look at Buenos Aires, all these medianeras, that's the beauty of one important element of the beauty of Buenos Aires is these closed facades of the medianeras, the light which is reflected on them. So we appreciated this wall, but to break this hermetic character, we introduced this frieze, which is a kind of a sculpture as you use it in 19th century buildings. The sculpture as a decoration, which has a clear function to say something about the content of the building. And when you look at it at night, you see that it is made with light. But somehow the situation we like much more is during the day. This frieze wouldn't reveal its technical trick that is applying. So what you can see is also the brick with the natural light on it. And here you have brick with larger joints. They create a shadow. But in these joints you have before I explain how it is resolved, another image. You have in this joint you have a LED, which is not visible. So what you can only see is the light which is reflected here in this joint of the brick. So
it's a special brick.
Yeah, it's a special brick. It's a bit higher than the normal bricks. So here you have the normal bricks, which every layer is stepping forward and back. So you have the shadow, so the layer of the brick is really showing very strongly. And here you can see the shadow of these joints. And there where you have the LED, the shadow is kind of killed. And the LED, there is a high-tech system. You measure the light on the facade, the natural light, and you calculated that the LED has the right intensity to reach the lightness of the facade. So it's a high-tech element, but at the same time it's very traditional because it creates the play of shadow and light on a massive stone facade. That's the medianeer, that's true, that's the side facade. And of course the beauty of just a closed facade. We also use different colors of a brick. So it's like a bit like anticipating the dirt. This is brand new, but the dirt, so in the lower part it's a bit darker. And then to the sky it somehow gets lighter and also somehow of course reflects the light of the sky. This is the backyard situation, which we like very much as it is getting so romantic, and it could also be almost a Roman ruin, also together with the historic building from the 1930s in the background. Here you can also see the windows, which have shutters. So the building is really very physical. I come back to that, and this plan reveals the typological reality, as I have seen before. It is the existing typology of the courtyard and the new one, which is completely squeezed in. It was a very small plot, and of course a requirement for as many square meters as possible, because as every museum they collect and collect and collect, and they cannot exhibit as much as they would like to. So we really squeezed in this volume in this plot. And you can see that, of course, this irregular shape of the plot informs the building. but not 100%. The building looks for a certain autonomy, but mainly it follows the two streets. Now it follows this street and this street, and this situation is like a kind of a crash, where it breaks and creates this this expressive entrance situation. But this was then translated into a typological plan, so these main geometries of the streets, they form the inner organization of this very complex shape. Now if you don't look at the inner, this shape is super complicated, and it was developed in a early stage during this competition, and then we were fighting and fighting and fighting. How would we organize this inner structure? And it was somehow revealing to understand it as two buildings standing at these two streets, like an archaic floor plan. The most simple way of creating a floor plan, if you have a volume, cut it in 2, in 4, in 6, in 8. No? So it's two buildings standing at the two streets, and the staircase is using the leftover. For art, it's quite an advantage if you have rectangular spaces. That's what the museum required, but the staircase doesn't need it. So it's a clear hierarchization between the main exhibition spaces and the kind of the staircases. Where in the staircases you could say it's not even a problem, but even an advantage. We appreciated very much this geometry in the floor plan, which is not rectangular, together with the geometry of the staircases, which creates a completely weird space. We also, it's like in a kind of a factory. It has something very industrial, and it develops an extremely dynamic space, which has to do, of course, with the movement of people going up and down in this museum. So we created two completely different types of spaces. This staircase, another image showing the staircase going up from the ground floor, from the entrance hall. We also supported this geometry by introducing these linear lights. And we liked, again, the grey color of this marble, together with this very industrial ceiling and the industrial rendering of the plaster, the metal detail of the handrail. So this is this very plastical space of the staircase, which is fundamentally different from the exhibition space. This is a connection space between the existing and the new museum underground, and this is a typical exhibition space, which is rectangular, very tectonical. The wall is differentiated from the ceiling and the floor, unlike this the staircase, where the complex space is held together by the similarity of the colors of the materials, and here it's very different. So the floor where you are standing as a person is completely different from the wall, which is the display for art. And then we like to develop this load-bearing system of the ceiling. This is the top floor with skylights. This is the first floor with this side, the windows, lateral windows, and this ceiling, which is very tectonical, kind of translating a traditional ceiling construction with beams into a modern concrete construction, which also takes up, it joins all the technical needs. You have this lighting, you have spots, you have all these antennas, no sprinkler, but the alarms and fire alarms and so on. That's a beautiful picture because it shows this window. Almost, you don't see a lot of this building, but you can feel the shutters, which are very physical. So the physicality of the brick facade, but also of these shutters, which are built in this galvanized steel, which reflect these very traditional shutters of these ancient traditional houses. So building up a dialogue, even if it's a monument, it has a different scale and it's built with different materials. It speaks as it is just another house, you could say. No? And this is a series of Warhol and other American art, which is an important part of the collection. Which brings us to the next museum.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, sure. So we are almost done. So what is interesting about the museum is that actually in our career, quite early on, it will not be in this, it's in the extra material for those who want to have director's cut after a break. But we won a competition for the Swiss National Museum extension very early when we started our office. But that took almost 20, no, not almost. The whole project went in phases over 20 years, but the museum as a topic is something we have been busy with over a long time in our office. And what is interesting under the title of the architecture of the city, is it now belonging to the ordinary, is it a monument? I believe Basel is really, that was the idea, integrated into the city. So Christoph just said, it's one house out of many other houses in a way, but of course at the same time it's a public building. We had other projects, or we're currently building a similar project in Cologne, a museum extension, always in that field of tension between the ordinary of the city and the monument. A project which is quite interesting for us, and it's a collaboration with ETH architects from Barcelona. There was a competition again. It's an extension to the MACBA. The MACBA is the Museum of Contemporary Art in Barcelona. This is the Raval, or the left hand of the Ramblas, of the Ramblas. To the left, you see the part of the very dense city center, surrounded by the Ensemble by Cerda. Just to give you the context of Barcelona, so we're talking Old Town, in the very city center. A city center that, by its density and social fabric, is also has been a recurring subject for many generations of architects, how to improve the conditions in this very dense city center. Many of you might know it very well. It's also, by the way, now one part of the city of Barcelona that is highly affected by this over-tourism problem, but that's another story. Even though in the 1980s, architects, Clotet and others, started to develop plans how to improve or reconquer, as I said at the very beginning of the lecture, reconquer the historic city by opening it up. There are cloisters, monasteries, old hospital structures. The idea of that generation of architects was that one should open and connect these embedded sort of closed spaces and to make them public spaces. And in this context, a bit against this idea of a very subtle historic network which is opened up, then the museum by Richard Meyer came, a star architect landing his sort of big luxury yacht into this Raval. In a way, it's a fascinating building, and that is the elegance of a typical modern building. But you see, it is detached from everything, and it sits there, and in a way, without getting lost in details, one could say 20 years after, 30 years after, it did not really connect to the neighborhood, which is also not an easy thing to do. There is other parts. That's a 15th century chapel here, fragments of different periods in history. That was a cloister. So anyways, this chapel and these structures here, they also do belong to the museum, but they are disconnected. So it's a very interesting context, again, because you really have the combination and the different layers next to each other. And this is a focus to that plaza in the center with the Richard Meyer building. The main entrance is actually a tiny entrance here, but it has a big ramp. So this is the circulation space facing the plaza in the south. This is the chapel. Sorry, I'm standing in front of it. This is the chapel, which is also used as a performance space for the museum, and these other adjacent spaces. And here, developed out of the rhythm of the structure of the Gothic chapel, or no, Renaissance chapel, you see a new structure. This is new. It's more clear here. The red is new. So, speaking about adding layers, this is almost a symbolic diagram that speaks about adding volumes, adding layers on top of the existing. This is actually the structure. It's a box and a screen. You could also call it an arcade, or we call it the galleria. It is a screen that is opening to that square. Or you could also invert it and say it is the idea that this public space is entering the museum. Something that strangely doesn't really happen here on our model, yes, but in reality this is closed and it's also detached. It's used by skaters. Some people are intimidated and afraid of the skaters. They make noise, and that's quite violent, no? But the idea of our project is, and that was different from the other competitors, it was about the exhibition space in the box. And we said it's maybe more about urban space. So the museum, architecture of the city, it's also about urban space. That this plaza is invading the museum is informing the plaza, and then by adding onto and building on top of, we create a little stretch, which is an urban balcony that could be quite interesting. It's on the southern side of the plaza, so the sun is not directly shining on it all the time, so it's actually quite an interesting space. You see a section, Meyer building on the right, the many layers of all the new on the left. As much as I speak of the old medieval city, there is a parking underground, so it's even a bit more complicated. It's actually quite a mess. You have 2 levels of parking. For the relationship of the 2 museum elements, it's interesting because you can potentially also connect it. As very often in the competition, there was the idea that we could connect it too. But now it's too expensive for the moment, which is fine with us, because it makes the public plaza even more important. But we have to build on top of that. What is also interesting, it's again brick, even massive brick. So you see the massive brick walls, they are getting a bit slimmer to the top, following the logic of tectonics and gravitation. And then the beams, metal beams, it's elementary construction in a sense. No? It was also nice, we also tried to do it low-tech in terms of building systems. So, of course, the 3 galleries of different proportion, following the section, the logic of construction of the walls. You see the different width, also slightly varying in height. They are air-conditioned. Then you see a gap space between the old historic structure and the new wall that can be naturally ventilated and used for night cooling, so it's a buffer zone. The same is true on that side, and the same is true for the galleria. So maybe you follow more or less. Huh? It is just, again, the idea to save technical means and resources and energy by subdividing it in different zones. A few images, that's inside one of the galleries. This is the in-between space. On the left, the historic wall. That's the shot in the other direction, looking back to the window where we were. So this is a more dramatic space, speaking about that relationship of old and new. This is now on the other side to the plaza. The brick. We like the idea to paint one face of the brick white. So depending on the perspective, you remember Hamburg, where the pillars are closing the wall. Is it a white wall? Is it a modern building? Is it an archaic sort of arcade? It introduces again a certain ambiguity in its presence. And that has also to do with the fact that the Meyer building opposite the square is white. That's the view in the Galleria. Square is on the left, the exhibition on the right. This is when I enter from the plaza, the Alps. So there is a romantic thing. This is the chapel, this is the old wall. You got it, no? You follow. And then, in the meantime, we developed in an even more radical way, an open staircase. It's open to the outside climate, where we can then reach the upper floors and the terrace. Now you see the white brick and the red box, the different layers. And this is the view, the skater in the foreground and the open museum in the back. And with that, I give it back for the last time to Christoph to show you
another museum, another ongoing project in an early stage, which we do together with the Antwerp-based office Bau. In Basel, of course, as I said, a museum is a public building, and public equals monumental in this modern understanding of the term monument. In this, but there we really integrate the scale of a public building of the museum into the historic structure of the city. And in this case, in Antwerp, it's a different way. It is very clearly monumental building, monumental in scale, monumental in its urban role, and this has different reasons. Of course, the brief was given somehow that it should be a high-rise. It can be a high-rise. It has to be a high-rise. Otherwise, you cannot place the square meters that are needed. But of course, these are just the requirements by a client. And you, as an architect, you have to find the form and the arguments why this is the right thing to do, architectonically, urbanistically, but also functionally. We will come back to that. We were developing, of course, this is design, developing your arguments for such a monumental vertical museum. This is the place where it is going to be built. This is in the backyard. You can see the Schelde, the river, which is then also connecting this important harbor to the sea. And in front, it's a kind of artificial docklands which were built in 19th century, and they were connected also because you have the tides and the different river water levels by this lock, which connected this inner dock with the river. And here you can see it in a later photo. So the piece of land between the river and the docklands were built with the traditional way of 19th century block city, perimeter blocks. And you can see now these ships using these docks. Later on, these docklands were not used anymore because new harbor was built north of the city. And you can see that it was covered in the back and used as a parking lot for different ways. And today, now it's transformed into a park. And the lock itself was filled in also, and they planted these trees. And later on, a 1960s administration building was built. And you can still see in the front the entrance to this lock on the riverside, which is still existing like that. So it was an exceptional situation within the structure of this 19th century city. So there is a kind of a historical, infrastructural reason behind that. The fact that this plot has always been different. So there is no reason kind of to reconstruct as we did in Hamburg, somehow, where it is a kind of a reconstruction of a historical plan of the city, somehow to also fix the mistakes of former generations. In this case, this place was related to infrastructure, to the scale of the harbor, and this is the sections through the building where you can see in the underground still these existing walls of this lock. We expect them to be there. That will be a next step to research what exactly can still be found, because they are somehow listed and protected. How to build this building between these locks, and then this very high building of around 80 meters, which develops. And this was quite a challenge in the competition, to develop a vertical museum. Of course, we are not the first ones to build. It exists. And a vertical museum, 80 meters, is not comparable to a vertical housing tower or a vertical offices, because housing or offices, you have kind of a stacking of floors. No? You go either to floor 37 or to floor 52. But in a museum is completely different, because as a visitor you would walk from floor to floor, and you don't have a floor of 3 meters high or 350, but there might be 6, 7, 8 meters high. So it has a completely different logic in its verticality. So what we developed is a superposition of different parts. So we avoided the repetition of the office tower by clearly creating identifiable pieces. The main box is the exhibition box for the collection. Then a podium for the temporary exhibition, which normally temporary exhibitions have more visitors, so it's closer to the ground. Creating a clear terrace between the two, which is accessible, and as these terraces are of course very attractive as they are relating to the public space. Creating a restaurant and different public functions up here, and then the whole technical installation that you need for ventilation and so in another box. So it's a kind of the closed boxes, exhibition, collection, technique, separated by a public ground floor, public terrace, and public functions there. So we found this very, for us, very satisfying, somehow very simple form of organizing the program and giving an expression, a tectonical expression of superimposition of architectonical entities. This is the position in the map of the city, where you can see this very specific situation. The floor plan, where it was important also, as such a attractive situation, you face the river and you face the park, also to create a typology which would allow this double entrance, so that building wouldn't have a front and a back, but clearly two entrances, but not two identical sides, as you have seen in the photo. The sides are very different. So this is the ground floor, of course, with how would you put the cores, which is the main issue in a high-rise. Again, the program collection, as I said. And again, this visualization showing also that the superimposition respects these two very different sides. So to the park, which has the scale of the city, of the urban space, you feel you have this, you use the potential of this stepping up, of showing these different entities very strongly, of relating the floor to this park, of creating an entrance which is mediating between the scale of the public space and the interior hall. Then the exhibition floor with this changing exhibition, which is very generous and very horizontal, whereas then the collection in this box is much smaller. So there you can also create different conditions on different floors for bigger and smaller pieces of art. And then what I say now, these two very different sides, which are somehow reflected in the way how these volumes are put on top of each other. So a much more kind of soft and articulated side to the city, which is creating a kind of a play with the scale of these elements, whereas to the water, which is really very strong, very large river, and very where the building reflects this landscape by a different scale by creating this very strong front. That's it already. Good.
Oh, it's good. That's over. That's the last slide, making a reference to the a publication that just came out for those who want to know more. But thank you so much for your patience and for your.
Thank you so much, Emanuel and Christoph, for the wonderful presentation. We sense your professionalism and creativity by spending the week with you in the workshop. But it was a true pleasure to now see it and be guided through your work by the creators themselves. I don't know how tired you are, for perhaps someone has a question or a comment. You're still hanging in there.
I don't know. We are fine, but we are in jet lag anyway. So that's but we feel a bit bad about just we know what time it is, but we are happy to take questions or comments or.
Perhaps if we see something that comes up, take a chance.
Up there.
We have great students at the school, eager to learn at Friday at 9:30.
Or maybe to tell us just what they think. That's also interesting.
So first I want to say thank you for the little lecture. I'm interested in this last project in Antwerp, mostly because it's kind of you were always thinking about how taking former typologies and how transforming them, but I think that this is a situation where maybe you can say the typologies doesn't fit to the program that you are doing in this museum. I would like you if you can get more into that about inventing a new typology and how could that work in this building.
Yes, I mean there is not really a precedent to this type of building, no? I mean, as Christoph said, there are vertical museums. Even in Antwerp, there is one. But what you can maybe sense here is we like the idea that this vertical museum is appearing almost a bit like a piece of infrastructure. So if you want to really make a comparison to types, maybe it's like a silo or a warehouse, and we tried to cut. What is happening? We tried to cut.
I'm sorry.
We tried to cut the program into different type of spaces, and so that was a bit the trick. We subdivided this vertical tower into different types: the big hall, the warehouse, and then maybe the technical container on the top. You see what I'm trying to say? But that's the invention. It's the compilation of different types of spaces. That's what we wanted to do, and also by showing the very clear cut between the lower part and the middle part at the top. We even try to emphasize that. So it is, and that's a bit of the invention. We are combining three buildings, one on top of the other. That was the idea. I don't know whether, and relating it to the place, to the fact that it is along the river. You find harbor infrastructure, so it is in a way also reacting to this maybe. So that was our inspiration. It was in the first place the attempt to not do a tower, but a repetition of sort of mid-sized buildings. Sounds a bit theoretical, but that's what we did.
I have a bit of a question of how is, if you could tell us a little bit more about your design process, because we've been discussing during the workshop this idea of being a tyrant with the type of drawing or not, or you've shared so much of how you do research and the typology book that you started. But also Marcelo made emphasis in his introduction towards this idea of that buildings things look different and that your reading of the city is different. But I was wondering a little bit how you make choices in the offices, how you handle different options. You just have a hint. It has to do with this historical lecture. Just perhaps a little bit about this, given also that it's a big office and that you're handling large amounts of work right now and various types of work, as you showed.
One could say it's a really difficult question. Maybe Emanuel has an answer, but I could also say, a design process. Even if we pretend here that we have a very clear logic and we define the media in which we work and how we present it, a design process is always chaotic somehow. Because it's always about out of the chaos of unlimited information and requirements which are contradictorial, building regulations aside, economical conditions, functional conditions. It's a kind of chaotic, amorphous amount of information. And a design process is always about somehow creating order and finding a way through. And if you start here, then you have a problem there, so you go jump over there. So it's cleaning up this chaos, one could say, of information. And sometimes you have to start here, sometimes you have to start there, and you find it out by working. But of course, I think for us, what is really important, and maybe that's why also we built this model of these manzanas. The plastical model 1 to 500, which is also a standard requirement in Swiss competitions, is very important to us. So all of these projects, they have a very strong genesis process behind them in this model, where we build models. How do they fit in the situation? What do they create with the situation? And then we look at them, and if you have a model that somehow in a situation is convincing, we look at them and say, and now what does this mean? How does it work? And it's like kind of esoteric procedure. Look at it, and you should somehow understand what this means for the inner organization and the scenario, how it works.
I mean, it's very clear. It's most of the time, it's of course different when it's about the refurbishment. We try to create a credible urban figure without knowing already necessarily what its typological inner structure is in the first place, and certainly not knowing how it will be constructed. So we are not using a priori diagram. Very often we even don't know in the beginning whether this is a concrete structure or a steel structure or a timber structure. So it is really through the urban figure that the project is created. But then of course it goes back and forth. And also specificity in most of the cases we do, and this has every upside and downside, but we are doing competition projects, which means the clients are in a decisive moment of the project not really present, only indirect through the brief. So you have to build up your own sort of controversial discourse. It's a role play, do you understand? It's not the architect comes with a great idea and then the client says, I hate it or I love it. But you have to constantly take different sides. And that's also, we started designing, the two of us, from day one on. So it is sort of also the dialectics of thesis and antithesis, the doubt and the statement, and this is a very powerful tool. It can also sometimes lead to complete sort of blocking the process, but it's based on this dialogue, and the fact that it is the urban vision is helping because it's the generalization of the argument. We hardly ever produce architecture out of a personal intuitive gesture. It's not about expressing your inner ideas or feelings, but it's sort of making the case for a general truth in a specific place. And that's also why we can, to a certain extent, scale this up to bigger teams, because we share the argument. It's not about the brilliant idea of Christoph or of myself or whatever.
Yeah, that's the last one.
Thanks for the lecture. It was really inspiring. Really. I want you to expand a little bit the concept of ambiguity, because it's something that you go back and forth with the idea in different type of layers. I found it like you talk about ambiguity when you have a relationship with history and the city specifically. Your readings of the city are not direct, are always like that twist that you are always talking about. Then the argumentations that you do, there is kind of skepticism of being objective in some ways, of some kind of skepticism of the pure reason in some way. Also, when you talk about modern architecture and you work in a modern pattern, then you modify the repetitions, or you transform something, like perversions in some way. And then in the ambiguity of materializations, how material works. For instance, when you make a massive brick wall, but it lights and it starts to talk and express words, or when you open a box on the corners, it's not a box, it's something else. So those different layers of ambiguity, or maybe what I would like to know is why ambiguity, and it's something that I find it very related to the time we are living in some way, but I want you to hear about you.
Nobody. I know. The ambiguity has to do with the idea of creating an object that is maybe not all too easy to assess, and we believe it makes it more durable. If you can offer different readings, in its structure it has to be clear, I believe. And I hope that most of the buildings are very clear in their formal and spatial structure. But the aesthetics, the crossing over, also this one. By the way, this is galvanized steel, and it also alters with time. So depending on where you stand and how you look, it looks like a very massive monolithic stone building. And then again, it's like a carrosserie of a sort of a big rocket, So it has also, its physicality is ambiguous. It's maybe this, In terms of the urban figure and the type, we at least we try to be very clear. In terms of the expression, we like the idea that the building maybe has a sort of a complex personality, because the city around us is not a very clear case anymore. And in that sense, you're right, it's maybe the times we're living in, but you could also argue this has been the reality in a city since ever. There is not a consistent physical and temporal reality in a city. And these buildings, by trying to be credible members of this community, perhaps it's a harmony-seeking attitude, they are robust, heavy and light at the same time. The bridge is super heavy, the arches. But when you go close, you understand this thing is a high-tech engineering element, and it is sort of hollow, so it's light and heavy at the same time. We believe this is a higher form of perfection. But also because you cannot fully describe what it is. And you come back and maybe we also believe that in the arts, or in many forms of let's say human cultural expression, this can be a very rich way of making a statement, with a certain risk that you might be misunderstood, but I don't know. Do you think this is a problem?
No. At the end, no. I think it's a very fertile material to move with it. But I think that skepticism is also something that is related to the failure of the idea of movement, of all of us thinking the same under the big umbrella of very objective ideas, and we are also in that, as you said in the beginning, we are like postmodern in some way. So we are in the distance of modernism, postmodernism, and what happens when we all
Yes.
have like, objectiveness under our way of thinking. So I find it amazing, and that's why I wanted to
No, thank you. I don't want to prolong it too much. We had a conversation in the exhibition downstairs with a group of students. When we are aware of the responsibility we have as architects making a building, we have to be, of course, it has to be clear and have to be robust as a gesture and as a form of organization. But it must be thought and produced in a way that it can belong to many people, and that it can last over time. So it has to be somehow, aesthetically speaking, accessible to many. And that's not to be pleasing the masses. It should be, our buildings, most people find them a bit difficult in the beginning. They are grey, they're a bit nasty, look at this guy here. But with the time, maybe you start to understand that there is a sort of a more generous logic to it, because it's not speaking about this author, it's not about our personal taste, it's not about our style. We are not marketing our architecture through our buildings. We are sort of, in that sense, it's a humble position, even a building like that. We give it to the city and we leave it open to be sort of appropriated. That's at least a noble ambition. Let's see how far this then really goes. Anyway.
Well, it's almost 9:30. Thank you so much, Christoph.